Hello and welcome to Channel 51 News for Tuesday, the 2nd of September. And the world is starting to ask real questions, not just here in Australia, but it has now been framed. The migration debate. There you go. Isn't it wonderful that finally, after the events of August 31st, the Rallies, there is a discussion currently taking place. And it will be a long time before we get admission, but at the very least, there are now sides being chosen and a pathway, a divide between the conversation. Let's start today's news bulletin by hearing from Jacinta Price. I think you'll be impressed by what she said and realise that this is no longer a uni party as such. Let's play you that clip right now.
You've spoken in support of our migration heritage, the migrants to our nation, and that the flag represents a bringing together of Indigenous British heritage, but also the migrant threads of our history. Are you worried about what the protests yesterday, the message that would send to migrants in Australia?
Look, firstly, I'd like to congratulate those who marched yesterday. I know the vast majority of Australians that were out marching on our streets were marching because they love this country. And yes, we have every right. Just to be concerned with the levels of immigration into our country does not mean that you are racist. In fact, I saw wonderful footage of members of the migrant community with, everyday other Australians singing our national anthem together yesterday, and that was deeply heartening to see that, because there are members of our community who come from migrant backgrounds themselves who hold the same concerns as everybody else. And you know what, I also want to acknowledge the fact that those marching yesterday were marching because they're sick to death of being told our country is a racist country, that our country is a horrible country, that we don't care for one another, when the vast majority of Australians absolutely do care. So it doesn't concern me, because I know that many migrants, including my own husband, know that those marches that were being held yesterday were for reigniting the spirit of Australia, teaching our children to be proud, to call themselves Australian once more, but that yes, we should be allowed to address concerns about the fact that there is lack of infrastructure to accommodate the millions of people now that we're seeing the Prime Minister bring into our country, that is effectively vote stacking the country for the benefit of Labor and not for the benefit of Australians who already live here and aren't investing in the appropriate infrastructure anyway to deal with the mass immigration that's occurring. So, and I'd wish other media platforms would stop painting everyday Australians as though they are horrible racists and get their facts right when it comes to this level of reporting. What concerns me is people who burn our flag, people who support terrorist groups such as Hamas and wave the flag of ISIS instead of supporting our country.
There you go. So Jacinta Price seems to be on not the same side as Albanese. How about that? And at least giving you somewhere that you've got a debate now. You're not racist for questioning migration and certainly the agenda. And in this particular episode of Channel 51 News, we're going to see the other side and who actually is the aggressor. In the meantime, just a glimpse from the rallies, this one from Perth.
Are you really disappearing? Just another dying race. Hey, true blue.
There you have a glimpse of what's happening and a bit of fair use applies there with John Williamson, that message to the social media platforms that we're going to have to allow us to play that. Meantime, let's now listen from this commentator and his perspectives and the comparisons in Albanese's language over the last couple of weeks.
Why is it that when far-left protesters wave communist flags, the same ideology responsible for over 100 million deaths, the Prime Minister looks the other way?
Yesterday's march was peaceful and was an opportunity for people to express their concern about what is happening in Gaza.
But when ordinary Australians march with their own flag all he talks about, all he can focus on is the handful of extremists.
They weren't big numbers in the scheme of things in a nation of almost 27 million people, let's be clear here. But what we have here is neo-Nazis being given a platform.
Why is it if you march anywhere near Nazis that automatically makes you a Nazi or racist? But if you march alongside communists, who objectively are the most evil force in modern history, you're not met with the same outrage. In fact, you're excused. Some even celebrated, like the Abby Chatfields of this world. This is the hypocrisy Australians see every single day. Self-hating Australians are allowed to flourish. Through the mainstream media, they can burn our flag, they can chant to abolish our country, and are still held up as brave protesters. But ordinary Australians, marching with pride, are painted immediately as extremists. Why is that the case? I'll give you an example. What happened here in Adelaide with the man holding up a sign glorifying Desi Freeman, the alleged cop killer, was disgraceful. Police are now on a manhunt to track him down, and rightly so. But where was the manhunt when the Australian flag was burnt? Where was the outrage when an elderly Australian was spat in the face by a far left protester? Watch this.
80 in a couple of weeks, and I've come here today to show my support for Australia. We're trying to do a march once, they're here every single weekend.
Where was the outrage when feces and petrol was thrown at people marching? Those acts were just as extreme in my opinion, yet they were brushed aside. No arrests, no mainstream media attention, no government fury. And this is why trust in leadership is collapsing. Because extremism didn't come out of nowhere. It grew out of failed governance, the destruction of the middle class, the wiping out of small businesses, Australians forced out of jobs for refusing a medical product. It grew out of resentment when Dan Andrews turned Melbourne into an open-air prison during the pandemic. When leaders destroy livelihoods, erase freedoms, and pick and choose exactly who they want to condemn. They create the division. If the government wants to earn back the trust of Australians, they must call out extremism equally, on both sides, far left or far right. And more importantly, they must face the truth. It was their double standards, their destructive policies, their treatment of ordinary Australians that lit the fire in this country. Until they own that, Australians will not trust them. And why should they?
Really, really interesting points being made there. And of course, how can you trust a government when you can see quite clearly some form of agenda forming? But is it? Well, let's dig a little deeper now, and we're going to cross to another commentator and his analysis. And I'll let you be the judge exactly what's really going on behind the scenes. Let's play it for you now.
Enough.
No more division. No more hate. No more racism.
No more anti-Semitism.
No more Islamophobia.
I'm watching this new ad campaign about standing up to hate. And do I agree with the messaging? Yes. Of course we should reject racism. That should go without saying. But then I watch the next clip.
But Islam will enter every house. Every house. Don't worry about the Islamophobes. They can yap all they want. Their children will be Muslim. It's coming in every house in every country. Today here in Australia, subhanAllah, I'm sitting here in a masjid that we have people all the way out past the second place. Look at this. Who could have imagined these many Muslims in Australia? And it's not going to stop. You can stop immigration, you can stop whatever, you can do Muslim bans. Wallahi, it's not stopping. Because the Prophet ﷺ said it will enter every house. Today, from some of the staunchest enemies of Islam, preachers and pastors, you see Muslims.
This dude reckons every single household in Australia is going to be converted to Islam. Now, let me ask you, is it hate speech for me to speak out against this? Am I a bad person in the eyes of this campaign for not wanting this ideology in my house? Or is it hate speech for me to talk out against African gangs and the violence happening in Melbourne? Or that those who cut off civilian arms for a mobile phone should be deported immediately, which happened a few days ago? Or is that hate speech to say grown men shouldn't be allowed in women's spaces, even if they do put on a fake wig and wear a dress? You see, I agree with the principle in the first message, but do I trust the government and the media to fairly apply it while protecting free speech? Of course not. And here's the truth. The last time I seen a bunch of celebrities unite for a TV campaign like this, they were telling us all to get an experimental COVID jab. And we all remember how that turned out. So, what I'm telling you, be very careful about the way governments try to manipulate your thoughts through feel-good media campaigns. And this campaign might be what it says it is. And if so, fantastic. Well done. But it might also be laying the groundwork for stricter speech laws. Laws that silence Aussies. And laws that might restrict us from speaking out against mass unchecked immigration, rising violence, or social decay in our own neighbourhood. So ask yourself this, is this campaign really about stopping hate? Or is it about stopping you from speaking up? I do not support racism in any shape or form. But when the government uses it to justify new hate speech laws, you better believe I'm going to start asking some questions. What's your thought?
Now, we learnt last week that the IRGC was responsible, according to ASIO, who reports to Albanese, and Albanese was out there giving a speech telling us that the Iranian ambassador would be expelled from Australia as a result of two anti-Semitic attacks weighed on Australia, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. Now, when you look up the IRGC, you can see that their MO is to damage, harm Western and Israeli culture. In other words, they want to harm it. They want to attack it. They want to destroy it. And we allow people into our country, and it is conflated or obfuscated from the idea that this could even be a possibility. You're always meant to say the vast majority of. However, if the vast majority of the plan is to do the opposite, at what point do we get to have the debate and not get flushed down the toilet? Well, how obvious does it have to get? I'm going to play two clips in succession. The first one out of Germany. It is in German, but of course subtitled. Have a look.
Die sagen, ich will hier keine Scharia in Deutschland. Das ist Schwachsinn. Jeder, der sich
den Islam verändern. Du bist für authentischen Islam, so wie er ist.
Jeder, der sich als Muslim bezeichnet, muss die Scharia wollen auf der ganzen Welt. Ich will die Scharia in Deutschland auf jeden Fall.
Würdest du die deutsche Verfassung aushebeln, wenn du die Gelegenheit hättest?
Auf jeden Fall.
Okay, danke.
Wie zum Beispiel? Wie könnte man jetzt aus Deutschland einen islamischen Staat machen? Wie zum Beispiel?
Laut den Werken ist das so, dass man, wenn man in der Mehrheit ist, wie Sie auch erklärt haben, sind wir dafür befohlen, Deutschland einzunehmen, auf jeden Fall.
Also es ist eine islamische Pflicht, auch Deutschland einzunehmen.
Auf jeden Fall.
Ich respektiere deine Ehrlichkeit und du bist ja gegen die Liberalen, die jetzt sagen, nein, das stimmt nicht und wir sollen hier in Frieden leben.
Muslime zu sein. Warum?
Es ist eine Auseinandersetzung, wir oder ihr. Entweder ihr übernimmt uns oder wir euch.
Ja, auf jeden Fall. Und darum gibt es diesen liberalen Islam. Gibt
es eine Unterscheidung politischer Islam und anderer Islam?
Jetzt bin ich jetzt im politischen Islam, wenn ich sage, ich will die Scharia, dann...
Ja. Nein, ich meine, Islam ist doch in alle Lebensbereiche. Kannst du sagen, Islam hat in Politik nichts zu tun?
Gar keinen Fall.
Das ist Kufr, oder nicht?
Natürlich. Ja.
Und welche?
Ich verstehe die Menschen. Manchmal, man will seine Religion beschützen und dann sagt man Sachen, die nicht stimmen. Ja, das mit dem Handabschlägen gibt's nicht, etc.
Mit welchen Mitteln wollt ihr die Scharia hier installieren und einen islamischen Staat machen? Mit welchen Mitteln?
Ich rede nicht von Anschlägen jetzt, zum Beispiel, wenn ich jetzt hier einen Anschlag mache, hier, wo sie gerade demonstrieren. Das ist falsch. Ich rede davon, wenn die Muslime in der Überzahl sind, dann, wenn es sein muss, mit Gewalt.
Das ist es. Das ist
auf jeden Fall.
Das ist es.
Danke, dass einer ehrlich ist und das so sagt. Danke.
Das
du bestätigst
ich habe
genau
so gedacht,
das.
30 Jahre lang habe ich so gedacht wie du. Ich habe immer einer meiner Slogans in den Moscheen. Ich habe Unterricht in Moscheen gegeben. Ich habe 2 Moscheen in Berlin mitgegründet. Ich habe immer gesagt, Deutschland verdient eine satte Islamisierung. Und ich habe immer gesagt, du weißt ganz genau, dass die Scharia bedeutet vieles. Scharia bedeutet die Regelung, wie du betest, wie du fastest, wie du zur Hajj gehst und so weiter und so fort. Die Scharia ist in jeder Moschee lebendig.
Now let's cross to what we're seeing from 2 Danes and a Pakistani.
Kijk på svenskerne, kig på nordmændene, kig på finnerne, mand. Vi er flere millioner, mand. I er i et samfund, der ikke laver, I ligger og boller dyr. Det er derfor, I ikke har fået børn, mand. Har du brødre? Har du søstre? Har du brødre eller søstre? Har du brødre eller søstre? Har du brødre eller søstre, mand? De forældre, de knæpper dyr, mand. Det er derfor, de knæpper hinanden. De kunne give dig en bror og en søstre, mand. Vi er kun 5 millioner, I bliver aldrig mere, mand. I skal fucking skamme.
So what would happen if a bunch of Australians rocked up to Pakistan, walked into the Pakistani parliament and said, you're all garbage, you're all no good, we're taking over, we're going to do it our way, and we're going to populate, and we're going to have our own way here in Pakistan. How long does that last? Well, you've already answered the question, haven't you? So why does it play in the West, and why do we have this guilt and self-loathing that seems to go on? Well, let's now show you a little bit more. I'm going to play you a clip now. This is from Alex Jones and his interpretation of what's going on.
In Australia, in Japan, in Germany, in France, in Scotland, in Ireland, in England, massive protest against the open borders, against the illegal alien invasions that are taking place. This is footage out of Germany. If you go to my X account at Real Alex Jones, you can see where they put a composite video together that shows at least 8 countries that it's happening in all the boxes. We're going to show you that coming up. I will guarantee you. In Ireland, in Germany, in France, in Poland, in Britain, in Australia, in Spain, in Austria, and again, many other places, like Japan of all places, people are marching in mass against the UN globalist replacement migration invasions. And this is footage in Japan that now in some areas looks like Islamabad. And I've got the statistics here out of Europe, Japan, you name it. Over 80% of the Islamic invaders never get a job and are on welfare forever. That's how it's set up. Previous waves of Muslim people coming to the West got jobs, ran businesses. This is leftist NGO set up to put them in these no-go zone ghettos and create the balkanization that the globalists have been looking for. But this is just amazing when you see the footage out of Australia, particularly, to see the huge crowds of people that have had enough. Hundreds of thousands marching in major cities in Scotland, Ireland, England.
So plenty of news there, coverage from around the world. Of course, our Prime Minister still pretending that the numbers were tiny, but were they? And of course, it was just the beginning. And I'll remind you of Nicole's post from yesterday, where she says this is just the beginning. September 13 now must become the next wave. So that's also important, that this is just momentum, and all politics is not only 51-49, but how you get there, and how you get there is via momentum. Let's now play a clip from Elon Musk. He's talking about the perils of mass migration.
The mass immigration is insane and will lead to the destruction of any country that allows unfettered mass immigration. That country will simply cease to exist. At the end of the day, it is a numbers game, a numbers situation. If there are 8 billion people in the world, and let's say you're a country of 50 million, 60 million, or for a medium-sized country, but even for a country like the United States, which is 350 million, given that there are 8 billion people in the world, it only takes a few percent of the rest of the world to move to the country to where it is no longer that country. A country is not its geography. A country is its...
Elon Musk certainly letting us know his perspective. Let's have a look, quick glimpse of what's happening in the UK at the weekend. Now, I know you've seen this before, but I'll play it again for the record. This is the former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth, Gavin Ashenden, when I interviewed him a bit over 12 months ago. This was his comments on how he put it all together, and I think it is very, very important that we are reminded about it.
If you want to have a conversation about what we're going to talk about now, for example, with anyone over 50, you can probably have it. But if you try and have it with most people under 50, you can't have it. You can't even have the conversation because of the way in which education has, well, effectively brainwashed. It's a very clumsy word to use, but the level of political, sociological, philosophical propaganda that's come through the system, it's partly to do with what cultural Marxism has called the long march through the institutions. They've reached everywhere, and they've filled people's heads with information and patterns of ideas that dislocate them from reality. I think that's the real difficulty. You say, look, even to the extent that politicians are afraid to tell you who a woman is, there's hardly any greater dislocation of basic reality than that. I think the best reason for the process by which it happened is the cultural Marxist one, because there really was a group of people called the Frankfurt School who decided that Marx's economics weren't good enough, and if they wanted this totalitarian revolution, they needed to have a plan B. And plan B was to present dialectical materialism in a cultural rather than economic context. And so the culture wars started, and they started quite early. All the political correctness goes back quite a long way. But what's extraordinary is the way in which people swallowed it. And I spent 25 years teaching at Britain's probably most radical left-wing university. And round about 2000, well, two things happened. First of all, I became alert to what Islam was intending to do at the turn of the millennium, because I had Muslim friends. I was involved in fairly high-level conversations between Islamic, Christian, and Jewish representatives. And they told me that their intention was an Islamic Europe through immigration. And I couldn't believe it. And when they told me the statistics that already by about 2004, they had 50% of people under 16 in 7 or 8 major towns who would eventually vote for Sharia law, I realized that democracy and demography would present part of the country into their hands. And so by the year 2000, it was clear that Britain was going to become a new Lebanon, just because of the numbers. And when you said this to people, they just laughed. And I said, but look, here are the numbers, and here are what my friends tell me, and here is what Islam is and what Islam says, and here is what Islam has done. What hole in the jigsaw are you missing? Because but still, they couldn't get their heads around it. And then about 10 years later, I realized that what we then called the political correct agenda was going to stop you saying some things. And along with Peterson, who's been so helpful to many of us, by showing us that if you can't say things, you can't think things, mainly because most of us, we all have limitations in the way we think. By about 2010, I could see that I could see that the political correctness was going to stop us talking about things. And so I went looking for the solution. I don't know how many people knew about the Frankfurt School in 2010, but I didn't. And so, then I read about it and I thought, whoa, this stuff is crazy. But if the long march through the institutions is really going to work, and above all, it's chosen to use our preoccupation with sex and with gender to get at us, then we're in real trouble. And I then discovered I was in so much trouble because I began by being very pro-LGBTQ plus for all kinds of kind of normal reasons. But then when I discovered some of the implications of what was going to happen, babies being sold, bought and sold in order to make gay couples feel more accepted without any concern for the human rights of a child who at the very least ought to have the right to access to their biological parents rather than be constructed as a kind of social add-on. I then resigned from my university post because I didn't want to get sacked, because as I was talking about these things and asking about them, I could feel the kind of the dead hand of censorship moving. So I left. And then during the next 10 years, of course, the whole woke thing.
There you go. It's very impressive, and it shows you that this has been thought about for a very, very long time. And of course, those in the know have been pointing it out for such a long time, but it hasn't yet become mainstream until just now. And in Australia, August 31, certainly a turning point. And how will we cope with this? Now, very important, there have been calls against the whole extremist component, and Thomas Sowell, and of course the National Socialist Network, the so-called neo-Nazis, etc., and the separation, because you can't all be tarred with the same feather, the same brush. And that's the point. It becomes complicated. Just because you walk past someone doesn't mean you have those thoughts, etc. So how do you bring it mainstream? Well, it appears that there is certainly enough ammunition at this point to be able to start to make real arguments and make real points, but it's the approach that will count. And as we started this with Jacinta Price, and then we ended it with Gavin Ashenden, we had Elon Musk in there and some very thoughtful comments. You would have to think that the ball is now in our court, and we do hold the advantage if we want to put a stop to mass migration and the obvious consequences of that. In the meantime, in other news today, and very important, what we're seeing now is that Donald Trump has been promoting Operation Warp Speed pretty much since its inception as a way to speed up and bring the vaccines to the population. However, Trump wants to now know whether the mass injection of mRNA shots was brilliant or not, and asks Pfizer to show the public the great numbers that they showed him. And as you can see there, I hope Operation Warp Speed was as brilliant as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. Thank you for your attention to this very important matter. That is a massive statement, and there are many, me included, that said Operation Warp Speed had a very specific purpose. And we'll get onto that in a minute. In the meantime, here's Robert Malone's comments. He said the real reason for the recent CDC resignations is that the ACIP subcommittee, which is led there by our friend Retsef Levy on COVID-19 vaccines, got approval to investigate the safety and efficacy of COVID vaccines, and they knew the gig was up. The truth was about to come out, and they would have to account for their actions. All you need to do is read the recently approved terms of reference for that subcommittee, and it all becomes clear. There was great resistance from those people like Dimitri and others who did not want those frames of reference to become where it was. And Retsef Levy said, let's explore and let the facts fall where they may. And it appears that Retsef Levy is getting his way, and the truth will come out. So you know that Trump, well, some are trying to say that he doesn't know. Of course he knew. Operation Warp Speed, very specific reasons why. I'm going to play you a clip now. I think it's really important to get this into the agenda. It might be tough to take, but really important. Have a look.
One of the most serious posts I've ever made. If Trump wouldn't have won in 2016, we probably would not be here. If you guys did not know how bad FEMA was, let me just show you. So this goes back to Obamacare. FEMA and Obamacare, they were working hand in hand, man. So there are a ton of FEMA camps all throughout this country that were set up to enslave us, to euthanize us. This right here is the Obamacare approved guillotines. 30,000 plus guillotines were approved back when he was in office to be dispersed in these FEMA camps. But hold on, check this out. This is a map of all locations for FEMA camps in the United States. But hold on. Back to the beginning, that Obamacare approved that code I showed you. You can look at the top left here. This is the 2015 Obamacare code, legal execution, and ways of doing it. In fact, they would get reimbursed for having these executions. It says by gas, decapitation, and many, many more. It's pretty demonic. But hold on, let me show you something else. I will never forget years ago when I saw this photo. I didn't know what it was. What do you think it is? Those are plastic coffins. There were millions of plastic coffins put around the United States in these FEMA camp areas. Who do you think they were for? I think you can guess. My friends, there was a plot, there was a plan. And in 2016, that plan got interrupted. Hillary was supposed to finish out this plan. It was Obama for 8 years, Hillary for 8 years. Had she have won, we would not be here. That's how serious this operation is. So, I'm so glad that FEMA's being exposed. I'm so glad that people are seeing the truth. But now we got to come, unite together in truth, and most of all in love, and help each other out.
It's unreal, isn't it? So if Trump really did bring Operation Warp Speed to speed up the process of getting the vaccine to market, it was to prevent a delayed lockdown period, a complete decay of business, knowing, of course, that this was at the end of his term and it would have allowed Biden to keep us locked down for that 4-year period. and waiting for this vaccine. So at that point, there would have been tons of legislation to basically make that the only way out at that point was compulsory medicine, and therefore that's the point. So did Trump do this knowing that the day would come when you would be able to hold them to account, and of course to force absolute power to conveniently believe that it was able to get away with everything it could? I mean, look at Fauci and what he did when he told us that that the virus was a natural occurrence, when we now know that it was man-made, and he deflected that. And of course, there's a whole history there that we've covered many times over. Well, let's now hear from Nick Holscher, who works with the McCullough Foundation, and his take on Trump's announcement today.
In President Trump ever questioning Operation Warp Speed, ever questioning the vaccines, but he went on Truth Social, I don't know if it was late last night or early in the morning, and he basically said, hey, show us what you got, show us the data. He said, I've seen data, I'm happy with the results, so he's still kind of latching on to the whole, hey, Operation Warp Speed saved billions, but at least this is the first time that I've seen where he's sort of questioned it, and he's called on Big Pharma, and particularly those who established or created mRNA technology. I don't want to call them vaccines, mRNA jabs to stick into people for COVID. He started asking them for data. What do you know? What have you seen?
Yes. Well, first of all, this appears to be a possible massive inflection point in the disclosure of mRNA harms, because you're right, previously it was all Operation Warp Speed's the best thing we've ever done, it was the best operation in history, and now this is the first indication of questioning the fact of Operation Warp Speed and how it was, if it was even brilliant at all. And so this is massive, and he's asking Pfizer and other big pharma companies to disclose what he calls miraculous data. We don't really know what that means, but we do know one thing, or many things actually, of the catastrophic harms of Operation Warp Speed and the mRNA injections. Verified all in the peer-reviewed literature now. Thousands upon thousands of studies document these harms. But most recently is when we've uncovered very, very, very worrisome findings. And we can start with anything, really. We can start with cardiovascular, right? Most people are understanding that the mRNA shots induce myocarditis, right? But we've actually, the McCullough Foundation, dug a bit deeper. Myocarditis is not mild and transient. We now have about 4 peer-reviewed papers that show why it's actually very severe, long-lasting, leaves permanent heart damage, micro scars in the heart, which actually leads to sudden cardiac arrest. That's why we still see 5 years after the campaign, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds dropping like flies from sudden cardiac events, right? So this is very bad. Myocarditis is not mild. It's very deadly. Okay, so we have cardiovascular, right? And we also know it increases risk of heart attack, right? Cardiac arrest and heart attack are different. It increases the risk of both. Very, very bad. And we have neurological disruptions, right? Serious neurological adverse events. A study by Thorpe and colleagues found 86 neuropsychiatric adverse events were linked to these shots, including homicidal behaviors, psychosis, schizophrenia, cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, brain clots, and, about 70 other things. So we know it damages the brain. We know the mRNA and vaccine spike are found in the brain at autopsy in hemorrhagic stroke.
And still, people are trying to convince you that they're all safe and effective and nothing ever went wrong, and the science of vaccines can never be questioned because it's always so perfect. Well, I think we'll give the last word on that subject to Jimmy Dore. Here is his take.
I don't have many friends after COVID, right? I told the truth about COVID. And you want to experience social distancing, tell people the truth about Tony Fauci. They'll stay away from you. And I'm not saying that the COVID-19 vaccine doesn't work. All I'm saying is everybody I know who got the COVID-19 vaccine then got COVID. Is that how vaccines work now? Could you imagine if we all got the polio vaccine and in the same year we all got polio? I'd be like, hey, I don't think that polio vaccine works. Why do you say that, Jim? I got fucking polio!
Yeah, it's got to be laughed upon. In the meantime, there's also plenty of sadness, and here's the story of a Mississippi news anchor, Celeste Wilson, who was passed away, announced just at the weekend at the age of 42 from heart attack. How does a healthy, beautiful, good-looking woman, fit as a fiddle, have a heart attack? Well, there's only one way, really. If you follow the actual narratives, of course, we will have to debate that one until there is no further debate. But you can see when you are up against insurmountable odds, you must chip and chip away. And here is another story, our last for today, where many of us are watching on and waiting for arrests. Now, Michael Cohen, a former Trump lawyer who teamed up to try and take him out alongside the Stormy Daniels scenario that resulted in Trump being convicted on 34 counts for something that he didn't actually have anything to do with. And Michael Cohen was the one apparently paying money that therefore was considered to be a crime so bad that Trump got no penalty whatsoever, but just a conviction. Well, here he is talking about the possibility of actual arrests from those attacking Trump.
Here's the crazy thing. He's going to succeed. And everybody's turning and saying, oh, he can't do that. There's statute of limitations issues on this. This person has prosecutorial immunity. This one has this. Let me be very clear. They're talking about a playbook from 5-10 years ago. The playbook today is very different than any playbook that anybody has ever seen in this country. Now, I've seen it. I've seen how we used to do things at the Trump org. What he has done is he has put them on steroids. And these son of a bitches are benching 500-600 pounds like it's nothing. And they are succeeding. So when I turned around and I was saying to John Bolton, you best lawyer your ass up, my friend, and it's not going to make a difference, because I guarantee you there's a document in the house. There's a manuscript in the house. There is an email, on the computers, either in the house or the office. And they will use that. They will indict him, and he will suffer the same way that I did. You are up against a machine that is so big, so strong, so powerful that there is no way to avoid it. And that is what the plurality of Americans ended up voting for.
There you go, a big dose of reality. Michael Cohen there talking with Joy Reid, and not very far to go. So the United States is having a public holiday today. Still plenty of news that we saw just there, and you can bet that the story about Operation Warp Speed will develop, and we'll keep a close eye on Nick Holscher, Peter McCullough and others, and even Robert Malone. Even Dr. Paul Alexander, never been a fan of Malone, but Malone was the one coming out and telling you. So now that the great investigation is taking place there in the CDC, headed by Retsef Levy, and you got RFK Jr. at the very tippy top, we now know this narrative will continue. And there are many, many others to follow. But here in Australia, it is all about the debate over open borders. And you've got enough ammo, even in this show, to be able to cut it up, divide it, and start making real arguments as we advance towards the next rally, one where Albanese will struggle to tell us that nobody cared, because the opposite is entirely true. See you all on the next show.
News from around the world as it affects us at Channel 51. The latest interviews, the archives. The world is changing rapidly. Putting it all together, buy one, get one free. Subscribe at channel51.com.au and get QCitizen.net for free. Daily news, twice weekly interviews, archive of hundreds of major interviews, special events. Thank you for supporting independent media.